We're back.
We're back. It's another fabulous, hard to believe a month has gone by. Where's time going, Monifa? I have a feeling we might talk about that a little bit today.
Wormholes, Susie. They're irrelevant. They will be spoken about.
It's all connected.
Imagined or real.
Through the
It'll be part of the
wormholes.
combo.
Welcome back, everybody. We are so happy to be with you again for episode 5 of Verve and Vision, Sovereign Spirits, Mastering Midlife, or doing our level best.
Doing our daggone best. We're doing the best we can out here, folks. That's all we can do. Yes, I'm Monifa Harris, and I am so glad to be with you here today, Susie. And we're going to go over some cool stuff. So that's always fun.
There's so much happening. It's all happening.
Yeah, we got an amazing book this month, y'all. It is a deep dive, and it's the one we have been putting off. I don't know if we should say it that way, but yeah, we kind of put it off for about 3 months because it just wasn't the right timing, and it does take some learning, and integrating, understanding that information in a way that we can actually talk about it intelligently, right? It takes some time to do those things. So it's good because we've got some yummy gems for you. We'll be talking about that in this episode.
Yes, we will. And it is one of those. And we've joked throughout that while this was I think it was the first book that you and I agreed we needed to talk about on the show. And it's episode 5, but it's all in divine timing, right? All the synchronicities and everything that we've read to this point came up at just the right time for stuff that we were connecting with, but just kind of general trends and cycles. And we're going to take a closer look at that with Monifa's powerful insights in just a moment. And yeah, now is the time to call on Diana Chapman, Jim Dethmer, and Kaylee Werner Klemp to talk about the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. You can see how many flags I have in my copy here. And so we will dig into that. We've got and everything else. We'll just weave it all together. But we love to start out with Monifa's insights in where we are in the energy cycles. And ladies, whether or not you are still cycling, everything is a cycle. Nature is a cycle. We are in the late spring, cusp of summer phase of the annual cycle. We just finished a full moon. We're moving into a new moon. So we're in the waning moon. And Monifa's going to give us a little bit of insight on what keys are coming up right now. Give us a little help, girl. We need it.
We got a smorgasbord here. What I love about it is that's a little less tough love. I feel like we got a little tough love in the spring. Going into summer, it's going to start opening up, but it may not be as satisfying as interesting. I said that, but like as we would hope at this point, because we've been. I don't know about y'all guys, but I feel like I've been fairly patient. I feel like I've
tried. To be patient. That's all I can say about myself.
It's just me, but I feel like things should be moving along a little bit faster. And that was our big lesson that we're wanting from the full moon of the key 34, which is, I believe in the Karen Curry Parker is power, and in, or something like that. And then in the Gene Keys, it is that shadow of force, and then the strength of power. The gift of strength. So that must be right. Power was Karen's, and then and then the city is majesty. But it is this idea that we can make things be what we want them to be. It's this idea that we can force timing and that we can make things happen if we just try harder. And it's something that is a I don't know, a landmark quality of the people that are in my work, and myself included. And it's one of those things where I've had to say, okay, just back off. There's only so much you can do. You work from the evidence you have, you do what you are inspired to do, and then just leave the rest of it alone. But it was felt like pressure big enough that you couldn't help but want to force, right? But that's the whole
Right.
point. The point of the energy is to bring into awareness what needs to be shifted, right? So a lot of us are still kind of like sloughing off that heaviness. As it wands, out of the full moon, we're releasing the things we need to release about that. And for me, it was like some deep shadows around how I felt, what was important about what my work was, as far as I can think of that as timing and understanding cycles. And then what about that is a form of control, manipulation. How much can I accept that that's part of how my mind works and my personality? Like, what does this look like for you guys? I want you to bring up your versions here, right? I'm hoping they're a little close to mine, because we tend to swim in the same pools when we're in the same energy like this and we're showing up together. So how did that show up for you? What were the shadow, like, you might have just not noticed enough because it hasn't been the top tier problem? You fixed most of those things, which is why you're so frustrated that this problem is coming back around. And you're like, when I'm doing the things, what else do you want from me? And we feel like, again, we have to work harder, and that will be enough for them to get what they want from us in order to get the thing to keep moving. And that's not what they want. They want you to find the layer under the layer. It's like the deeper shadow of that force. Like, why do you not accept force? Because remember, that shadow isn't wrong in the Gene Keys. It's not that force is wrong. It's that how are we believing that to be necessary, right? It's because of lack. It's because of a belief that there's not going to be enough, right?
Right. That fear starts slipping in.
Yeah.
And I'm getting the visual, I'm not the first one to make the analogy, but that Chinese finger toy where the harder you pull your fingers out of that little woven tube, the more stuck you are. And we get into this loop. It's definitely a pattern, I think, that a lot of us picked up generationally. Our parents served it up. Their parents served it to them, that hard work is the answer to all the ills. And how's that working for us? Right?
How's that working?
I can take a look around and say, yeah, I'm not seeing the evidence that working harder is getting me farther. It's getting me a little tired and cranky. But it's a default that we fall into, because it's really hard to surrender, that balance of surrender and strength, right? Surrender isn't a sign of weakness.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. And part of my desire for more awareness was around, when is it the right time to be in action, and when can I be satisfied with being still? Which is crazy, because again, that's what's coming up in June, which we have the new moon that's going to be in Gemini. That's going to give us this energy, that the gate 35. Let me look that one up. So we have Gate 35 in Karen Curry Parker's Quantum Human Design is experience. And in the Gene Keys is the Shadow of Hunger, the Gift of Adventure, and the City of Boundlessness. So I love this, because this is basically saying, well, the solution is experience, which is like, okay, what I would think all those actions added up to that. At least at minimum, I've done enough stuff that's what's happening for me right now. So I'm living an experience. It's just not the what I wanted, right? And
not the one I planned, because my plan is clearly the right one.
Yeah, it's obviously I already know everything, and this original plan should have worked completely fine. And there's no evolving here to be had, right? So that there's that belief, but basically this is what's so frustrating about this to me also, like, just to be completely transparent, is that it's basically saying that you already have the experience of wisdom on this, which is so hilarious, because I was literally just telling Susie how I had lived this experience enough times to know what was happening in my body was not useful, right? And at the same time, like, it wasn't shifting me the way it used to. It was just knowing that it was wasting time, knowing that it was wasting energy wasn't enough. I had to go deeper, right? That's what I was talking about. And now it's saying, now basically that you've gone deeper, you've released the stuff that was really the underlying problem where you keep coming back to this pattern. And now that you look at that experience and that wisdom, do you see how that was playing a role in your decision making, even when you weren't necessarily in that feeling anymore? So in other words, I had already kind of lived the feeling of enoughness, and now that, like, I'm doing all the right things, so it should work, action, I'm not experiencing the same experiences, and then I'm making the experience the problem. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Anyways, what it's saying now is that essentially that experience of wisdom is the truth of it. And with the underlying understanding, we can build on that experience. We can trust that experience again, And so that's that new moon piece. How does that feel?
On June 6th. So one week away. We're in the in-between times. And can you tell us again what is the strength and the shadow? Because I usually find them very tightly aligned, but this one is going to take some thinking on.
Oh, because force is just energy. So again, the reason why there's nothing wrong with force is because it's only energy, is how it's applied. So again, what is I think of, I say again, but I'm talking like I'm still in a conversation with a client. But essentially, there's a energy that we perceive as a push, which is really just the energy in the right position of the cycle, right? It's just having the fulcrum of the engine, the thing that's moving, having it in the right position for the greatest, or the effect or experience, or the outcome of that cycle we want, right? So that's I know that is a little, like, they could have explained that in the kindergarten class, they couldn't, right? Like, so
we're still figuring it out.
We're always complaining about what they didn't teach us, but it's a little high level. Like, it's kind of like, okay, I'm using the engine, like, why isn't it working, right? Well, you need it in its right positioning, the right priority, because the dominant possibility, right, of the use of the energy is that it's already strong, so that you're propelling an energy that will be in its highest strength. If you're propelling something and it has a flaw, the weak link in the chain, and then you put a ton of force behind it, it's just going to create a bigger mess, right? That's why the force is the shadow. If it's in the gift, that power, that's just effectively bringing it in at the time in which it can have the most impetus, because you are already in the truth, knowing the strength. And so, so that is the biggest, I know it's like, it isn't a huge difference to me.
And in the 35th line with the new moon,
the 35th, the new moon, that difference is more along the lines of, how are we allowing the desire for more to be realized? In other words, the impetus behind that energy is hunger. That hunger that is coming from the. Whoops! I keep trying to click on Zoom instead of. I was like, where is she going? But yeah, so that hunger is the lack of serotonin being received by the body. So it doesn't mean that you don't have any. So you can be taking good care of yourself and having all the things, the chemicals are available within the body, but we're not receiving them. And so we feel unsatisfied. That can be perpetuated by thought. And it's so interesting because, like he says in the chapter, that is the one of the biggest most powerful secrets in the gene keys. And it seems, I wish I could tell you like all the reasons why this is so powerful, but it's right at the center point of why we get so frustrated, right? It's not that it's not available. That's, we know that mentally a lot from our quantum human design information. It's not that it's not available. As one, everything is available. But what happens is that when there's an interruption in the cycle, that we don't recognize it to receive it. Right. So it's kind of that gratitude practice thing that starts opening up our receptors as well, because it's like saying, okay, there are things to receive, and I'm now acknowledging and receiving them. And now they are becoming those components of what I want. Right. So that is the biggest thing. It's like that by itself, just being in the framework of not letting, making the decision essentially that you are going to receive. Let me see if I can put this a better way.
Yeah. No, I think I'm getting it a little bit better now.
Are coming from.
Where the wormholes. But that desire or the appetite, right? That feeling of unfulfillment. I've been doing all the work. I'm not seeing the results. I can't force, because I learned that lesson last week. Still learning the lesson, still learning the lessons. And how do we fill this void, right? Where's that step out in faith, the confidence to step out in the faith that we need?
Yeah. That's the idea, is that the wormholes of miracles. So like all shadows are keys to the gift that are, like in this version, and they're calling it the miracle. It's part of the ring of miracles and the gene key 35. And the gift being adventure is now saying, like, I'm not using these experiences to satiate that need, that hunger. I am allowing love to be the experience of myself. This is a little,
there's that love concept that's going to be coming back through in the book. Again, it's all in the right timing.
Yeah. Because like, the shadow here is so interesting when the shadow plays out, because we think, oh, it's because I keep wanting things. I must just shut down the desire to have things. That's kind of my first inclination, right? It's like, oh, I don't want it anymore. That way you can't make me feel bad for not having it. And that is the repressive side of the shadow. And it becomes boredom, which is what I was just talking to Susi about, the boredom. And then what I found out in the 15 commitments to conscious leadership, it says that boredom is actually a result of unprocessed anger. So stress response for things that you're angry about, but feel like you cannot do anything about, right? So this is like, the solution is not always obvious in these shadows. The reaction side is manic. You're constantly seeking for that thing to be fulfilled. And so when we're coming into the understanding of the love, like what does love mean here? Because I believe we call a lot of things love that we probably should just find a new word for.
Like snow. So we need some more words.
We need a few more words. That's all I'm saying. But love here, I would consider more appreciation. It increases serotonin, which is why I went to gratitude, right? It allows you to go to the source of where these things can really be shifted, which is the inner peace. And how do we get that? The experience piece does not go away in the gift. Okay. Like the hunger for experience does not necessarily go away in the gift. The hunger for experience becomes an experience more of self, more of you will give you more peace. This is like, again, luckily we are talking to sovereign spirits mastering here, because it's a little high level, right, Susi?
It is an active process. It's about the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
But it takes coming back to it, right? Just because we didn't get it right, or it doesn't look the way we think it should, or we hoped it would, doesn't mean that it is a failure or that we need to work harder, right? Just keep coming back with fresh eyes, avoid falling into that fear response and judgment.
Well, and that's the thing. The fear response is coming from judgment, that's the lesson I was kept getting last week, was that, especially before the full moon, was that I keep judging the things that I'm seeing as if they're evidence of things going wrong, but I actually have no true evidence of things going wrong. How do I get out of this? Because in my opinion, because of the energy that was coming through, it was like not letting up, this feeling that something's going wrong, as long as I'm focused on external and I'm doing external things. So it's like I keep getting reminded of the external. This was only solved by doing my inner practice. And if I wasn't in my inner practice, if I wasn't still in the sensations of that practice, if as soon as I put my thoughts on those external things again, it would go back to discontentment. There was no way out. And that's how it felt like for me. I don't know how other people felt. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's been a
it's
lot.
really that inner, like there was no outside solution. And at least in that place for me, anyways. Not
Yes.
immediately. There was no place to act on. And I think that's what was the frustrating part, because I kept thinking, well, what else can I do? Right. And there was nothing else that I could do. And when I was like talking to, like when I was being conscious, and I was in my spirit, like there was nothing else I could do about it. I was just, and I often say, go sit down somewhere, right, until the shift happens, to my clients, right? Like go sit down somewhere, like do something else that you enjoy until it happens, because there's nothing you can do about it. I'm sorry. Like, and that's not a good, nobody wants that answer in my studio. Like they're like, no, which
But I've
practice should I
outworked
do?
it
Like,
before.
well, yeah, you can do the practice. That's a great ask. But a lot of people aren't asking that. They're asking, what do I do that will fix it? And they're just, at least for me,
Falling
again.
back into the force pattern. And I think that's a really beautiful takeaway, that is a reminder for us, that is, call it an experiment. If you're pushing and trying to make something fit into the mold that you had predetermined and it's just not going, instead of doing more work, how about give it some space, right? Turn your focus somewhere else. Like you say, go sit, go do something unrelated, go do something fun.
Yeah.
There's a novel idea, and
And
give it some space.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but yes, that exact thing, like what would be fun, right? That's what's so, again, frustrating for my people, is that they're like, I don't get fun until I get the work done, right? That's their mindset typically.
Oh, those old
So,
lessons.
yeah. And this is saying, no, you have to do something that appreciates who you are, your love for yourself. So this is interesting because, again, it's going into the full moon at the end of June. It's going into the full moon Capricorn on June 22nd of gate 10, which is self-love and quantum human design, and gene key 10, which is the shadow of self-obsession, the gift of naturalness, and the city of being. So it's
Very
so,
interesting.
you see how, like, again, this is high level work, because even to make the distinctions between these things, why is it okay to focus on myself in key 35 when now that I'm focusing on myself in key 10, it's self-obsession, right? Like learning the distinctions is kind of where we understand how the perspective is causing this separation. I don't know how else to say it. So that 10 is basically saying, yeah, love yourself, explore yourself. And, that process tends to exclude others. That becomes self-obsession. We can't see the characteristics of anybody else, only our own. And then, like, this was also where he introduced the concept of narcissism. I don't know if I'm sure it's in other chapters, but like, it's very blatantly, narcissism is this thing as the shadow. It's the reactive component. So self-denial essentially is that other side of the shadow. And yeah, so it's basically saying that I'm okay, whether the focus is on me or the focus is on someone else, I can still appreciate, right? So the naturalness comes from being naturally loving to yourself without needing to only focus on self. that it also, like the shadow here can be obsessed with its own uniqueness. And when you get there and that's the only thing you're concerned about, you get lost in the maze of self exploration, self discovery. I'm not saying that this happens to our people, but it could. It could happen. So when we get lost in that cycle, well, if I just do more self-exploration, more self-exploration, more self-exploration. So the full moon is going to be about releasing that out of the fear again of not being seen as unique or not fully being self-expressed within this lifetime. I think there's a natural fear for myself and a lot of the people that I work with, that we won't be seen and heard in this life. And so it's kind of that pushback that says, well, I'm just going to focus on myself, because every time I focus on you guys, I get mad, I get frustrated, I can't get anything done, and I can't, downward cycle, and now I'm depressed, and it's all your fault. So that's the shadow, is that we're separating the two instead of saying, okay, well, when I'm appreciating you, I'm also appreciating me. When I'm loving you, I'm also loving me, right? And that's where the gift comes in. It's just natural to be appreciative of unique characteristics and qualities of persons, and then who we be together, right?
Yeah, and I think the idea of separation and the truth of oneness, which is another really important concept in the book that we're going to get to dig into, is really a struggle too, right? At what point do we better ourselves? At what point do we release and let other people do what they're going to do? Where, like, is there a healthy invisible line of separation, or do we just embrace that we're all different manifestations of one energy?
Yeah, that comes up in the chapter as well. It's because the whole point right now being, in the basically the cycle of the Aquarian age, there's a lot of ways to define it, but that's the one people most recognize. It is about being unique. Our goal right now is actually to achieve individuation by 2027. That's why there's a bit of a pressure here. We have all the keys leading up to now have been about, do you know yourself? Are you honoring yourself? Are you supporting yourself? Or do you know your purpose? Are you supporting your purpose? Are you honoring your purpose? It's been like a class on how to be in wholeness of self. And so that's kind of the discrepancy here. We're saying, like, what's it like? How do we describe individuation as community event? Because that's also what Aquarian age requires. It means that we are going to be connected in community. And really the response here is that as long as you are honoring yourself, then you will feel free to honor others, right? There's not necessarily a one or the other, right? Again, that repressive side is more like self-denying, and then that reactive side is narcissistic. So you're saying that you're not worth the attention at the time, and which is still a form of self-obsession, right? Like, well, I have to make sure I absolve myself from this dynamic, this community, this situation, so I'm not being selfish. But now we're actually being self-obsessed by focusing on what is us and what is them, right? Whereas if we're able to say, yeah, I'm unique, I do a lot of different things. I like crystals. I like, talking about I Ching, like, who does that? and then I go into a room and I'm like talking about how that makes me so different. And there's actually like a conference on I Ching, and I'm so self-obsessed, right? There's that version that becomes narcissistic, that I don't even see that you're as unique or as special as I am. It didn't even cross my mind, right? And the same, like in the opposite version would be, well, I'm just going to self-deny. Nothing about me is relevant to any conversation ever had. which is what a lot of my people do. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's what a lot of us do. We're so in that, we've been trained that way. And so, yeah, so in that self-denial, basically you're saying that you are so special that nothing that you are or do will be relevant for other people. You see how it's like a double-edged sword, especially when talking about like self-promotion, visibility, that kind of thing. So it's like, again, these are kind of high-level lessons here. What is the difference between self-love, which is again, is the quantum human design denotation here. And I think self-love, again, is a sense of appreciation. But let me give you 2 questions that Karen Curry Parker, or maybe 3 or 4. These are the questions that kind of helped point it out maybe a little bit. I feel like these are, I don't know, maybe you can think of something, Susie, as I talk about it. Where can I find evidence of my lovability in my life right now?
Ooh.
What do
I want
need?
people to drop that comment. Add that comment if you're catching this on Facebook or over on Monifa's YouTube page. Where can I find
think that
evidence
was really a
of
stickler, because now you have to
lovability?
go see it for yourself if it's evidencing, right? What do I need to take responsibility for situations I hate in my life right now? What needs to change? Where am I holding the blame? Right? Because again, like if we're tolerating those hates, then that's a form of not self-love. That's the opposite, right?
And where am I holding the blame? That's something that came up in the book that I really had to sit with. It's a victim mentality. We can blame other people or we blame ourselves. And we think that that's a selfless act. And really, we're disempowering other people from finding viable solutions when we take the blame.
Yeah. Isn't that so interesting? A few of the things come up in the book that are in direct correlation, but again, like you kind of got to get into that water a little bit, go a little deeper with us to see the correlations. But they're big. They're there for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Well, let's explore the book a little bit. We're going to get so much time together next week. For those who are in our book club, you can learn more about the Verve and Vision book club on our Buy Me a Coffee page. The banner is there on the screen. Verve.vision. How easy is that to find? And you can get the information over there. Every month, we're taking a look at a different book that feels really relevant. The energies are helping us decide what is relevant right now. And yeah, it's such a powerful book. I have to say, I ordered this when Monifa told me about it 4 years ago, and it's been sitting on my shelf. So I'm so glad that the date has finally come, and I'm working my way through this very confronting and somewhat challenging commitments, ways of being.
I'm looking at the notes here, like we were like, can we talk about how the unfolding is exhausting? Like going into the book, I think it is a little bit of a lovely segue here because when you realize how different the dynamics are, like you just going through the keys and like how much they look completely opposite and they're really the exact same dynamic. And it always blows my mind a little bit, but the same way here, like in this book, like they're having to keep going back and forth because it completely depends, even while you're reading the book, if you are above and below the line, which is the main question we're going to be starting here with about what's coming out of the book and how it's exhausting to have to kind of go back and forth. This should be a clue, by the way, I think, for those who do a lot of self-help, self-work, are working with our energy, our co-creators, are sovereign and doing more about being sovereign. The back and forth is exhausting. If we can build up some consistency where we can hold and train a standard for our energy, this will be a lot easier. It's exhausting going back and forth. Am I wrong? Like it's so exhausting because like the book forces you into like different perspectives based on what they're explaining and the processes that need to be implemented in order to support what's happening, So it's like a bit of a trip. So, go ahead and get your book now so we can get started, so we can talk about it a little bit more in our book club next week.
Yes. And I love the way that they frame it, and they've been working with business leaders for years. Diana Chapman and Jim Detmer are the co-founders of the Consciousness Institute. And they say, just be honest with yourself. You're not wrong when you're below the line. We're all going to be there. We need to cultivate the habit of recognizing where we're operating from, and recognize that there are healthier ways of being, of showing up. And that's what they identify early in the book. Their commitments are ways of being, which I appreciate. If we're going to throw words out there, let's frame how we're using them in this particular circumstance. But above the line, being above the line, is when you are open and curious, which is one of the commitments that they encourage, and committed to learning. As opposed to being below the line, we tend to be closed and defensive because we are committed to being right. So those are the big indicators for me: committed to learning versus committed to being right. And that ego question is definitely throughout the book. It really coming from fear and defending the ego. Our ego is our life. If we're wrong, then what value do we have, especially in high leadership positions? But as you told me, Monifa, early on talking about this book, it's profound for personal relationships too. And that's what's really extraordinary. So whether or not you're working, and whether or not you feel called to be a leader, it's really powerful to just have this lens to be observing yourself and your interactions with other people through.
It's all the levels, really. It's really that one-on-one, because there are components there that they have in place in full corporate systems. And it's also the interaction between group dynamics that get a little bit more intense towards the end of the book. So it's kind of that, being able to tell where you are in that. But yeah, that's exactly as beautifully said in the opening of the book. Is predominantly about this understanding of what it means to be above and below the line. You described it beautifully. And like my big takeaway from that big opening section with the stories and all that was, nothing is serious if it feels serious. Shift, which is again another kind of nice flag for me. It's like whenever I get super serious, it's like, is it that serious, or
I'm working very hard here. Really?
Yeah, well, it's so funny because I feel like a lot of times when I'm reasserting, I don't like to call them boundaries, but like again, like when I'm running into that border of how's my energy moving, right? I'm getting less satisfied with acquiescence, right? As I'm more aligned to right action, right? And so it is, but I get real serious about that right now, because it's something that I'm reinforcing with myself, and then I have to reinforce with others, like hubby. And so for relationships, it's very cool. It's good stuff, right?
The opening of the book, before they get to the commitments, it takes some getting through, right? We have to have this foundation of agreements on these commitments so that we can dig into it. And the 4 ways of being, which they take from Michael Bernard Beckwith in his life visioning talk. And so that is something you can find on, it sounds true. If you Google Michael Bernard Beckwith, who's with the Agape Church, I believe, in Los Angeles, and his life visioning, you can still see some talks he's given on that and that program. But the 4 ways of being: to me as a victim, by me, right? So shifting from that life is happening to me to life is happening by me, that creator mentality is one step. And that in itself can be transformative in especially a work culture. But then beyond that, you can move to through me and incorporating that surrender that we were talking about earlier, where we stop forcing and we recognize that we're part of a process and it's unfolding. And then finally, that like kind of upper level when we arrive, when we arrive, we will recognize that we can operate as me, that oneness that we were talking about earlier too, that there is no separation from the project, the client, the work, the goals. All of it is connected, and it's about how we show up and be present to it that has all the difference.
Yeah, which is, to me, again, it highlights that gate 35 that's going to be in the new moon, because it is that. It's that if you consider it all as one, then the negativity or the things that you don't want are just as much a part of what you do want as everything that you think will be external to that, right?
Right.
And so if we keep denying where their self is, where self is experiencing, then we will never find that solution, because it's part of one and the same piece, right? So that as me, again, I do think it shows here that it's a little bit high level, that concept of, yes, the problem is the solution. I am one, like it's part of the same roll of tape, so to say, so to speak.
Yeah, the insights that we gain from problems, right? The lessons that we get from what some people would call failure are sometimes the most priceless parts of the entire process. Without those obstacles and stumbling blocks, then would we would we have the end product that ultimately will be realized, but would we even appreciate it as much, right? It's all part of that process, the unfolding, even if it's exhausting.
It is so exhausting, y'all. Like, what I love about this is that same thing that I was going through. I was talking about how I wasn't sleeping very well going into the full moon, and all of those things, and how the process of exhausting, finding that underlying piece was exhausting. And then it goes into this next session of this commitment where it says like 4 things that essentially are what I went through. Something doesn't go the way we think it should. That's the first. This is acts of taking radical responsibility. This is basically how it unfolds, right? We become stuck in fear, sometimes anger masking as fear, because anger is more acceptable than being scared in public, right? We blame ourselves, others, or the system. It's just somebody's wrong. Somebody needs to fix it, right? Relationships solidify. So how we are interacting and the patterns of that are roles of being the victim, villain, and the hero, right? And Susie was just kind of referencing that before when we're talking about those emotions and those roles, right?
Exactly. We think that ultimately, if we're doing our job as well as possible, then our goal is to be the hero, without recognizing that that is disempowering other people. It's letting people off the hook. They don't have as much of a role in the outcome if you swoop in to be the hero, right? As much as blaming can be detrimental, that also, so some of these old paradigms of what success is and what it looks like, that might come from a culture that has skewed towards the masculine energy. Maybe we shifted to this place. Now there can be a lot more flow, less delineation and benchmarks, and this means we're on the right track, and more, it's all part of the process and it's unfolding. And what are we learning? And we don't have to be defensive if something went wrong. We get this opportunity to discover more and learn more about each other on the way towards whatever it is we're working to create.
And I don't know if this is totally irrelevant or not, but that whole kind of teeter-totter towards the victim, villain, hero, which is just, again, below the line responses to the external. It makes me feel like those things are the wormholes, right? They are the wormholes, and that's where the miracles come out. Because again, traditionally, it's like, who done it? Let's fix the weak link in the chain, which is so funny because I used that as a positive thing earlier. But the feminine, like if we're talking about like the feminine unfolding, that this is part of the consciousness, is the unfoldment of curiosity. So we're going to get into that next. But I think that expansiveness of just saying, well, does it really matter whose fault it is? Like, so let's get curious. Like, what is the underlying problem, right? And so, yeah, I think, again, we were well prepared moving into this material, because that is the real question. Did we get frustrated, or did we get curious about ourselves and the dynamics of the process, right?
Yes. Oh, it's taken me all the way back to the first book when we started with Unbound, right? And getting curious about what our desires really are. How disconnected have we become from what we truly want? How hard is it to sit with that question and come up with answers that are true to us, that haven't been superimposed by family or culture, that sort of thing, to break free of that and get curious. What do I want? So yeah, the first two, and I love how I made sure to flag this page in the book. They're like, okay, so it's not a checklist. You're not going to blaze through the 15 commitments, check them off, and be complete. And they break it down and they say the first two commitments, if you get this far, you're going to transform your relationships at work or personally. Radical responsibility is number one, and curiosity is number two. And if you bring these two, and I think it is transformative, if you shift into these states of being, instead of saying, well, it's their fault, or there wasn't enough time, or if only this had happened, if it's just, it is what it is, and this is my role in this, and everybody's ready to step up to the table and claim that.
It's
Where can we
yeah.
go?
The whole paradigm shifts, as people would say. The whole paradigm shifts. It is the fulcrum of power, and again, that's where Richard was speaking to in the Key 35. The shift happens when we can go internally, flip the magnet, essentially, and that flip is the curiosity. But it's what I want to point out, because it's time to point out these things, that the healthy masculine is that radical responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. That holding you to what you said you were going to do, or holding you to how you, I guess, less than that, than more holding you to your own integrity, the integrity of self, essentially, being responsible for what you say you want, what you are playing out in action. But just because you're doing an action, like we talked about before, doesn't mean you're making progress. And so are we holding ourselves responsible for the actions that we're taking that are actually impactful, So yeah, so it's pretty crazy. And what keeps us out of curiosity? I mean, I feel like that's why I move into the feelings thing, because it kind of keeps you, if you're in that below the line, they have like the levels of feelings, right? They had the blame and shame as the first level. The second level is intrinsic motivation. So basically like money, the vacation, the title, the recognition. Level 3 is intrinsic motivation. Well, they get to learn, they get to be fulfilled, they get to do what they want, right? Level 4 is play and creativity. And then 5 is love. So these are, and I put them in as levels, but I think he was talking about how these are more states that we shift in and out of these things, just like we shift in and out of emotion. So it's the troubles when we hold on to them, right? We're trying to hold on to these things, thinking that it will make things better if we feel guilty enough, if we blame ourselves enough, if we find who's at fault. We think it'll make us feel better. And it just doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. But they do. And, I've heard that for so long, and I don't know, as they say in the book, if Gay and Kathleen Hendricks in their programs coined this: emotions are energy in motion. When we try to restrict the movement of emotions is when we run into all kinds of struggle and force. And I find it really fascinating. So I love that they call on some real thought leaders in this space. And you can tell that they work closely with Gay Hendricks and their programs. But also in the book is really insightful taking a look, and somatic therapy is something that suddenly we're hearing and seeing in so many more places than we were just a few years ago, when it was a totally like a little tiny side pocket thing.
Yeah.
What is this saying and feeling like in my body? And let's like communicate with our emotions. But
Which
emotion
was
patterns in the
in
body.
Burnout. If you haven't watched Burnout, that was we referenced that a lot, and was super
Mhm.
powerful because we learned so many ways to address these stress cycles. Go ahead, Susie. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, that's another great little review. If you missed us talking about Burnout, The Secret to Unliking the Stress Cycle by Amelia and Emily Nagoski, that's another fantastic book that was just in time and on time to start us off early on in our series. And it is. And so the third commitment, standing in its own class, the next priority is feelings, that energetic, EQ, emotional intelligence. And then there's ways of being in the world and worldviews, underlying behaviors of conscious leadership, ways of being in relationship. And then the 15th commitment is kind of an homage to visionaries, I dubbed it. But I like how they've broken it down, right? There's always a process of unfolding. And I like how it's like, no, you don't need to just like fill in the blank, did it. But it's really cyclical. As is, and I'm sure other people have used the model, but Monifa, I remember when you introduced me to that cycle of evolution by Dr. Sue Morter, I think, in her energy codes.
A cycle of evolution. I'm not
The
sure.
cycle of rest and growth, and then there's a fallback before you spring forward again. It's like an opening spring.
Yeah.
Our path is not linear. Yeah.
Yeah. That is not just. And I saw a really great representation. They had written it out, and they went back, and went forward with a kind of a story dialogue. And it's so true. I feel this is also kind of those big dips after a learning experience. And then we think, oh, I should have, again, it's kind of the feeling we had last week of I should have learned this already type of feeling. And then like that dip, when you come back, like it's way lower. It feels way lower sometimes than the initial dip, where you're just like, oh, well, what is that?
Right.
What is that hole?
Right.
The
And
second
what
time
is
too, you're
that?
like, why am I under the ground? Why is the hole above my head? What is this? I have already worked on this.
Is it just because we recognize it that it feels so much greater the second time around? Like, oh, here I am again. I know where I am. I know this place.
Speaking for self, heck yeah. Like, because it's kind of like, I know this train at the back of my hand. Right over there is the hill. Why am I still having this experience? Right? Like, like so frustrating. But yeah, that's the thing, is that the being able to track that being low is an ascension point. I've been trying to like kind of explain this in voice as well. This idea that we have to climb, and like climbing upward and making it like more, feelings of heaviness, more feelings of I'm climbing, so I'm working harder. And that we think that's going to get us to the summit. And that, maybe that works when you're a rock climber, but but as somebody who is a metaphysician, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It doesn't work that way, right? You have to go down to come up. And it's not like if we're in the perspective that understands that, it's no longer a bad thing. It's just grounding. It's just stability. It's stabilizing the pattern. It's stabilizing the cycle. It's stabilizing concretizing what we know. It's making it even stronger, right? So if we have a better perception of that cycle, that evolutionary cycle, then it's less likely to piss us off. And then you can just relax.
Be perceived
right?
as wrong. It doesn't have to be wrong just because it's not forward motion all the time, just because it's not comfortable, just because you can't demonstrate evidence of your growth and perfection.
all the externals that we're trying to prove that we did it right. We're trying to prove that we're right instead of just knowing and instead of just allowing either one to be true. And if it's a challenge point, again, meeting the challenge. If it's not, then welcoming the discovery or welcoming the new thing in. But yeah, this is again, that's what frustrated me so bad, because normally, like if I had to coach myself through that, that's what I've told myself, like just go sit down somewhere until you until it moves through, essentially, because you're just grounding. That's all this is. Um, yeah, but like honestly, the frustration is what breeds the insight. That's the point, though. So you don't necessarily get to avoid the emotion. You just have to let it move through in the process. Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of that, as we wrap things up for today, but we hope we've whet your appetite so you come back and join us next Thursday in the book club. Let me share that info one more time. The fourth commitment. I want to hear from anybody who jumps in and starts reading along with us in the book. Let me know if reading about candor was as confronting for you as it was for me.
Super.
My polite little Midwestern girl upbringing was chafing just a little bit as we were digging into the possibility, the potential, what it really means, and what it can do to shift things when we really when we commit to candor, total candor in relationship. That's some powerful juice right there.
It is. It's powerful. I found that chapter super confronting. That's about where I was like, okay, I need to sit with this. The first time I read it, I was just like, okay, obviously I'm not here yet. I felt that way a little bit when we were talking about Unbound, the first book that we did this year, and on the Verve and Vision podcast. So you can find that in the roll. It was that same feeling. It was kind of like, okay, I know, but like now with Unbound, like I'm more familiar with it. I'm more comfortable with the uncomfortableness, right? The candor situation is still a little like, how truthful do I have to be? And are we really just talking about feelings like in a public place? Like there's something in me that says, I don't want to talk about my feelings in random corporate space, right? And so there's still a bit of work to be done there for sure.
But can you imagine a world where we get to talk about our feelings around the board table, where that is as much a part of charting a path forward for a company as is the data-driven numbers? The research has come in. This is what we've got to do. I love that analogy in the book where they're using a client case study and they're saying, and then we came in and we're like, how are we all feeling right now? So yeah, that is a powerful invitation. It might make you feel a little queasy in the tummy, but let's dig into that next week, because I think that the potential there, when you're in a shared commitment for candor, could be absolutely revolutionary.
Absolutely. I mean, it hints at it early in the book when it's talking about the emotions, because it tells you how it makes bad leadership when we aren't acknowledging those feelings. And so what it turns into, like how anger destroys and how fear basically makes us not willing to observe new possibilities. How sadness basically is not kind of accepting and owning a new version of a vision. So it basically makes the company not move forward. It's kind of stagnates the company. But yeah, so there's reasons for that. And the fact that they line them all up and give you like protocols to have the conversation, that they're not saying, yeah, tell me your feelings and throw them at me. They're saying, let's acknowledge the feelings and what part of the decision making that it's having is powerful. It is truly powerful. Absolutely. So y'all should come hang out with us when we talk about it and a book club. It's going to be epic.
It's going to be great. We hope you come back. Join us next week. Find that information in buymeacoffee.com/verve.vision, just like it says right there in the banner. Should be a comment there where you're catching the replay as well. Thanks for those who were able to join us live. It's so good to have company here on the show. That's why we stream this live on the last Thursday of every month. Book clubs on the first Thursday of every month. And we keep the conversation flowing. Thank you, Monifa, for joining me today. I just love this collaboration.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susie. I am so looking forward to next week, and I will see you guys there.
See you all soon.